We have to stand for something very strong, very powerful, that differentiates itself from Trump. We're not just continually reacting against what Trump is doing every cycle, every month in the news cycle. We're actually fixated on what we stand for.
Current Democratic Party seems fixated on sort of finding its leader as its own presidential process every 4 years, and not doing some of the rest of what you're talking about. And if you even think just recent history, 2020 was this really unusual primary where you had all these different Democratic candidates, but none seemed to catalyze anything. I mean, Bernie was the closest to finding a natural, organic following. And then the party very clearly at the elite level tried to stop that, which you can debate, but that was very clear. And then they brought in Biden as saying, well, he'll be the kind of coalition thing. Then we just touched on how in 24, when he was failing, they stood by him till it was probably quote unquote too late. Then they say, here's your new person, she's the VP. Isn't she great? Now, of course, there's a big skepticism towards running it back for her again, and then the search starts all over. And so how does that work within the laws of power that seem to be about trying to understand deeper trends and not just one great savior?
Well, you have to have, I was saying, you have to have more of a bottom-up movement and not be so top-down. And for years, the Republicans have been fighting on, so I have a law in there about winning the hearts and minds of people, which is a law that is about, it's a numbers game. Power can be a numbers game. You have to have as many people as possible on your side. And the Republicans for years have been fighting this way. They've been winning state governments. Getting control of state governments is a key pawn in their game of power, because it means they control things like gerrymandering, et cetera. They set the pace for each state, which has huge ramifications for the nation as a whole. The Democrats have been ignoring that. As you say, they're fixated on the leadership kind of things. And the thing is now, we see across America in this last election, there were plenty of Democrats who won in counties that Trump had carried, that did very well. So there's a lot of people out there who are actually realistic, who are pragmatic, who are doing very well, who they shouldn't have done very well. And so we have a lot of energy. We have a stable of young people who are energetic, who are realistic, who know how to fight. The party should be listening more to them. It should be growing more and more and more from the grassroots and not be such a top-down party. I think that's the main lesson I would give.
So thinking about what you're saying there and the comparison to Martin Luther King, I also wonder what you think is the role of people wanting to be with the winner, with the majority. Martin Luther King had many strengths. One of them was a willingness to not only risk everything, risk his actual life, which he tragically lost, but be hated, which he was by much of white America.
And by a portion of black
And a portion of the black community, and still go on. Precisely because he never put himself up for election. I always have told people, and you study American law, Martin Luther King was responsible for, helped write more big federal legislation than most members of Congress. He just didn't work on the inside. The Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65, and what he started but didn't get passed till after his death, the other fair housing legislation and protections. How much does it matter whether you're following people who are in that realm versus this popularity contest? And does it restrict people more now, Robert, where in American life, media saturation is so essential? It mattered then, but it's more saturated now. And so to be reviled or hated or unpopular for many years might be even harder today.
Yes, I mean, but there was something good about being hated and reviled. Sometimes you have to be willing to go out on that limb, and that's why I think sometimes we're a little too safe and a little too careful. But it's a totally different environment. But of course, Martin Luther King was also working in the era of television, and he knew how to use the media, and he was very savvy with that. But I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure about your question, though.
I guess I'm asking, does a movement need people who are willing to do that, to be hated?
Yeah.
In addition to the people who can get to the majority or 51%. And your book has been both studied and at times criticized for how realistic you are about how many world figures were able to be bad, if you want to be simple about it.
Sometimes some of the parties that have changed history, if we even want to look at communist parties and Lenin and Mao, started from very small groups that were very, very much hated and reviled and very much were a minority party. But they were able to build from that. And the point was that they stood for something very real and very solid that everybody understood, and they could build on that. But when you're so safe where you're trying to please everybody, I think it's very hard to build a movement around that. So sometimes channeling anger from a smaller group is a very powerful means to kind of leverage something much larger than that.
So this kind of brings full circle what you were saying earlier, which is liberals are very proud of what they call coalition politics, and everyone has a seat at the table.
Yes, I mean, I think the example I use, and I used in my book that I have on my version of The Art of War, was Margaret Thatcher and the Conservative Party in the 1970s. She didn't want to build a coalition party. She wanted to stand for something extremely different that stood out in England, that was like almost shocking in how it disregarded the norms of English politics, right? She wasn't a consensus builder. She didn't want to be that. She called them the wets. And so she made a very strong case that this is what we stand for, very, very different from the Labour Party. And at first, it wasn't very successful, but slowly it caught on. And I think it's just important at this turning point in the history of the Democratic Party, where we have to have a reckoning, and we have to be very realistic about it, that we come to terms with the fact that we have to stand for something very strong, very powerful, that differentiates itself from Trump. We're not just continually reacting against what Trump is doing every cycle, every month in the news cycle. We're actually fixated on what we stand for. I think, for example, of like Kennedy in the 1960s, where he had his campaign of the new frontier, right? He set off, and this is what we are, this is what America is going to be like going ahead to the end of the 20th century. We're about technology, we're about space race, but we're also about fixing all of these problems in the United States. But he connected it to our past, to the 19th century, to the frontier, to the pioneer spirit of America. But it resonated, it was very powerful. It brought all of the different problems of America together into one kind of package that he called the New Frontier. FDR did something similar with the New Deal. I think that's what we're in need of right now.
Yeah.